Thanks, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Digital Telecare Playbook Procurement Pathway webinar. It's quite a mouthful. I hope this session is really informative for you and enjoyable. And please, as Laura said, please share the recording of this with colleagues if you think it'll be useful for them after the recording's uploaded to YouTube. Also, just to say thanks today to our colleagues in the Scottish Government Tech Programme and in Scotland Excel for their ongoing support, both with the Playbook and with the wider programme. So as Laura mentioned, I'm David Brown, I'm Business Relationship Manager with the Digital Telecare team, and we are part of the Digital Office for Scottish Local Government. To open the session, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the programme so far and an outline of the wider Digital Telecare Playbook. Then I'll hand over to Colin and Richard, who will give you an overview of the procurement pathway. Following that, as Laura says, we're going to have a wee short question and answer session, and then I'll cover off next steps for the Digital Telecare programme that closes today. Just moving on. So a bit of introduction to the programme so far. So most people on the call will hopefully be aware that in 2017, all of the main telephony providers in the UK announced that they would be decommissioning or switching off their analogue telephony infrastructure and moving towards all digital IP solution for telephony. So that's all of the kind of copper lines that go underground that have been in place for 20, 30 years, for decades, and that's been the main route that people have used telephony and made phone calls in the past. That's also the main connection route for telecare services in Scotland at the moment. So that announcement had quite a significant impact on telecare services in Scotland, and how they would continue to operate in this new environment. At that time, the Scottish Government's Technology-Enabled Care Programme responded by setting a strategic direction which would support services through that switch off to 2025. And they addressed the challenge through digital improvement, integration and innovation. Just moving on. So around about that time, the Scottish Local Government Digital Office became involved, and the Digital Telecare team created a portfolio of programmes to address that strategic direction. The wider Digital Office was around to provide expertise to support this transformational shift towards digital telecare through things like thought leadership, operational telecare management, digital security, and portfolio programme and project management. Round about that time, so a number of early adopters, so a number of partnerships and services in Scotland began to move through all of the kind of key stages that were part of digital telecare transformation. So that's everything from kind of early stages of the programme through things like writing your business case and receiving sign-off to your business case, through to things like establishing your project team, right through to go live and testing and migration plans for moving citizens over to digital. There's been lots of kind of key learning as part of the programme, and lots of challenges and lots of really valuable data and information has come back from the work that these partnerships have been leading. A number of partnerships have succeeded in delivering a live digital alarm receiving centre, and they're all currently at various stages of testing. I'll say the next line with a wee bit of caution. So we had been, late last year, we'd anticipated that early this year we would have the first deployment of digital to citizens. What we didn't anticipate was the pressure and the crisis of COVID-19 that would hit us. So partnerships, quite rightly, we've prioritised their energies at that time and focused on the kind of pressing need that crisis created. So that's fine, and we were completely understanding and did what we could to support services through that period. I think the exciting thing for us now is that partnerships are starting to come back and say we've now got a bit of capacity and a bit of time to start looking at this again. And interestingly for us, I think not only have the implementation group, so some of the early adopters, have come back to us with a bit of capacity for this, but we're hearing increasingly from a number of partnerships and services that weren't part of the programme before now, and what they're telling us is that the opportunities around digital may have been really helpful actually to support them through the COVID crisis. So they're really keen to look at what digital can do to support through any other periods like that we've just experienced. So in terms of all of the learning from the implementation group, there's been lots of really kind of powerful learning captured. That's been distilled down, and that now forms the basis of our digital Telecare Playbook. So what is the digital Telecare Playbook? So it's a comprehensive, informative guide for services who are about to embark on digital telecare transformation. It's a digital repository consisting of digital telecare pathways which provide guidance, advice, support and templates, and these are all accessed via bespoke pathways. And these are all supported by a resource from the Digital Office with experiential knowledge, expertise, the guidance support and international research. So just keen to show you the landing page for the playbook. Hopefully most people on the call have registered and have accessed this resource and had a good kind of look through and looked at areas that would help them if they're looking at digital telecare transformation. We were really keen to build something here that made sense to you all, that was easy to use and that was co-designed with you all as well. So this is the landing page of the playbook here. Moving on. So just a little bit about progress so far. So we launched the playbook in October 2019 with launch of the management pathway. We followed that up with launch of the technical and security pathway in March 2020, and we launched the procurement pathway, which we're about to discuss today on the 28th of May this year. All of these pathways are a series of key stepping stones which are broken down across 3 phases, so discovery, planning and implementation. And just moving on, so just a little bit about uptake and usage of the playbook. So since its launch in October, 197 users have registered to access the repository, which is fantastic. That breaks down into 24 users from NHS, 143 from local authorities, which is great to see, 11 individuals from service providers and 19 from public organisations. In terms of breakdown by organisation, all 32 Scottish local authorities have registered, which is great. An additional 3 local authorities, so Leeds, Belfast and Cornwall. And we've had some really interesting discussions with those 3 organisations and some really good feedback on the playbook, and 17 public organisations. Just a little bit about the top 5 downloaded documents from the playbook since its launch. So those are mobile connectivity FAQs, data protection impact assessment or DPIA, initial transition to digital telecare action plan, digital switchover communication to clients and pre-digital data collection template. So just a wee example actually around DPIA, which hopefully kind of demonstrates the value of the playbook, but some of the early adopters, so some of the partnerships that looked at this, which is a completely new area for telecare. So most people will know traditionally telecare has been a really kind of locked down system, quite often off the corporate network, so very little risk around loss of data. And moving to a digital model changes that. So lots of this process was really new for partnerships, and in some cases partnerships took about 12 months actually to get final sign off on these documents from chief officers. So I was chatting to a digital telecare lead in a local authority a couple of months ago who advised that he'd managed to get his DPIA signed off in a week. He was really clear that was down to the templates and information that sits in the playbook. So that just really is fantastic from our perspective. We're just really keen that anyone who joins the programme now and is planning digital transformation, their journey is much more streamlined and shortened. So it's great to hear that. Just moving on. Just a little bit about feedback we've had so far. So some of the comments we've had have been clearly a great deal of thought has gone into creating the content. The playbook is so helpful in providing information from the basics I need to know as I start in the field through to detailed specs and templates I know will be invaluable as things progress, provides a structure to measure our existing rollout project. So that's just a wee flavour of some of the feedback we've had, which is fantastic to hear. I just really encourage anyone on the call to try and have a look through the playbook if they can, and we do appreciate your feedback. It's really important to us that this does what it's supposed to do and makes life simpler and easier for you all. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to hand over now to Colin McFadden and Richard Bridgen, who are going to talk to the procurement pathway in a bit more detail.
Thanks, David. So good afternoon, folks. The procurement pathway, as David's highlighted there, is designed to fulfill that niche and to help provide as much information and background to staff as possible. Really, we're aiming for these two key audiences, having developed projects within the public sector before, felt the need to obviously assist the Telecare staff, both those on the ground and in leadership positions, to help understand the procurement regulations and procedure, because there is a lot of confusion about procurement regulations as you move forwards, to help those staff in assisting to plan the transition from analog to digital, and to hopefully therefore be able to develop their timelines and understand what was going to be required. The other audience is the procurement staff themselves, because we would always recommend that procurement activity is done with the assistance of in-house procurement staff wherever possible. And a good chunk of the guidance certainly within the first phase, is there to introduce those procurement staff to the concepts and technology behind analog digital telecare, because most of them will obviously have some idea of IT procurement by all means, but the specifics of analog to digital are obviously fairly specific within that field. Excuse me. So, as with the three previous pathways, it's split up into 3 phases: discovery, planning, and implementation. And very much is designed to run concurrently with the management and technology pathways. So as you start off your journey from analog to digital, individual staff can pick and choose and move between the 3 pathways easily and smoothly, so that it's a fully cohesive journey all the way along, with just with different flavors between the 3 pathways. So we start off with this one. Digital familiarization is very much, again, aimed at those without previous understanding of telecare, or indeed those who don't really understand what digital telecare is about and what the difference will be for them moving forwards. So there's a couple of documents in there shared with others, other pathways, that will allow them to help broaden their understanding of where those go. Project availability and decision is largely going into detail on the technical elements and the availability of not just the actual solutions, but what technology is available out there. Again, these parts are probably aimed more at the procurement officers, but will certainly still be able to help inform Telecare staff. Of particular note in this one actually is a new document, again shared with the technical and security pathway, but fairly new to both. And this is the first of the security accreditation scheme documents. And this is a scheme managed by the Digital Office, which will vet suppliers who come forwards and want to participate anyway, and will allow essentially managed scheme to determine cybersecurity risk with those suppliers and how those suppliers have managed the access. This will therefore allow partnerships to bypass having to test that themselves and be able to use this centrally managed scheme when they come to their own procurement. Obviously, a number of partnerships out there already use someone else's ARC when they're managing their own services, and it will certainly be a decision point for a number of partnerships moving forward, whether to refit their own ARC or whether to look at procuring services from someone else's. So this step, while it doesn't have a document there, it highlights that fact and points people who are interested in looking at procuring services rather than refitting to digital ARC to the light touch procurement path, which Richard will touch on shortly. Again, market testing doesn't have a document there, and market testing will normally have been covered over by the pathway in itself. Again, we're highlighting at this point that if you decide to procure something which isn't on framework and isn't covered by anything else that Digital Office or Scotland Excel have dealt with already, then you will probably want to be dealing with some sort of market testing yourselves. If you find something that is completely new and you're trying to manage how to procure that. The next step, of course, is the choice of procurement procedure and route decision. And this has a single document in it, but it's a fairly wide-ranging guidance document developed by Richard Bridden from Scotland Excel. And Richard will be discuss that.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Richard Bridgen from Scotland Excel. Okay, procurement. The document that I've provided for this group is tried to condense quite a lot of rules and regulations and procedures into something that I think you can maybe understand. So what I've done is I've put it into an analogy of buying a house. If you imagine when you went back to the days when you bought your house, you had to go through things and they were very regulated, and there was a lot of things in the background going on, like you were getting checked by the bank that you weren't a money launderer, and when you were putting in offers, you were using solicitors, and you're probably using surveyors. And that's exactly the same way that procurement works in the public sector. It's a very regulated way of working. It's basically what you have is you have rules that are set by your own organization, but then you have overarching rules that are set by the EU. And that's why I say it's subject to the regulations. And this is something that you'll hear a lot when you deal with procurement people. You'll hear us talk about the regulations. And that's all it is. It's basically a set of rules and guidance that's been developed by the EU and implemented into UK law. So some of the things we kind of really stress is that you should go and speak to a procurement advisor, even just to have a chat about what you're trying to buy and how you're going to go about it, because they may already know a quicker way of doing it for you, or they'll be able to say, oh, hang on a minute, you need to go and do certain things. Okay. In terms of how you go about doing things in the public sector, there's two words that always come up: fair, transparent. And if you keep that in mind while you're doing your whole procurement, you will find it much easier to get a successful outcome. Okay. The other thing as well, I quite like to stress, is that I've done a lot of procurements, and some have been very successful and some haven't been. Okay. And generally what happens is that the ones that haven't been as successful have been because people haven't really understood what they wanted to buy at the beginning, and then they have then decided that they will go and circumvent rules and regulations to get things like a circle to fit into a square. Okay. Sorry, Laura, can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So in the document, there's 5 routes that I've shown to you, but generally what happens with procurement in the public sector, the value of the project dictates how you're going to go about buying things. Okay. You have a lot of leeway for relatively small amounts of money in terms of the public sector. I mean, £50,000 isn't exactly small for all of us, but it is in terms of a procurement in the public sector. The other key thing as well is that social care has a very unique way that it's treated in the regulations. The EU understands that most social care services are delivered locally. So you don't have to go through the same kind of rigorous process as you would for if you are buying products. Okay. And the other thing as well is we always stress that using a framework is the easiest way of buying something in the public sector. Okay, people have already gone through the process of checking suppliers for you, making sure that things in that you wouldn't even perhaps consider, like their insurances are correct, their actual ISO certifications are appropriate, and things like that. So when you go to buy, you can be confident that there's been a whole checking process gone through for those suppliers. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, Laura? Yeah. Okay. So one of the procurement routes, and this is probably the most commonly method of procuring things in the public sector, and this is below OJEU threshold values. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about below £50,000. Social care services actually has a higher threshold than that, but generally what will happen is your standing orders will dictate that you will do certain things for this value of goods. And what you'll probably find is that you're going out and you're asking for 3 quotes. There'll be sealed bids from suppliers, but one of the key things you have to remember when you're buying goods at this value is that you shouldn't be splitting work up. So, for instance, if you're looking for, you want to purchase a car, you shouldn't be just taking the purchase price for the car and then forgetting about the warranty and the maintenance and so on. That all has to go into the procurement. Okay, so that's why I say don't split the work into pieces of 50k. Also, some of the things about when we talk about fair and transparent, you need to make sure that the award is publicly noted. This is so that even if it's on a contracts register or on an advert, it's just so that the market has then been informed about what's happened. Okay, sorry, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. Okay, frameworks. Okay, frameworks, as I mentioned, are the easiest way for you to purchase things. Okay, and what happens with frameworks is you have 2 choices in how you can actually buy things from them. The easiest one is a direct award, and that's where you just simply go and give an order to a supplier. You've looked through what they're offering, the products or the services match exactly what you want, and you're happy with the price. You don't think there's any value in going out to competition on it because you're not going to get a better price or a better service out of it, and that would just simply straightforwardly be a purchase order going out. And you can actually award and a framework a huge amount of money through direct awards. There is no limit, okay, on doing a direct award. Okay, so you can go way in excess of the 50k, 150k, £1 million if you need to. The second type of award from a framework is called a mini competition. One of the rules, and the most important rule in this that you must remember, is that you have to restrict this competition to the suppliers that have been appointed to the framework. You can't allow new entrants to come in who haven't been put onto that framework. We put together a template for you for using this. But basically what you'll do is you'll put together your requirements, including any standards for goods or services that the supplier must comply with. And you can vary some of the requirements in the framework. So if you have specific needs that must be complied with, you can add them into the competition. Okay. But one of the things you've got to understand is you cannot qualify somebody again. The suppliers have been qualified onto this. So all you're simply giving them in a mini competition is, okay, I have some technical or quality requirements that I need you to do in excess of the framework or differ from the framework, okay, and I want you to give me a price for the work or the goods. You'll simply issue them to a supplier, and what you can do with this particular type of competition is that you can have if it's quite straightforward, it can be returned in 5 days, or it could be 28 days if you want something much more complicated. The timeline is entirely up to you, as long as you're fair and transparent about it. When you get the offers back, one of the key things you have to do is you must evaluate everybody like for like. So, and usually what will happen is there will be a framework guidance document that will tell you exactly how you'll score somebody in terms of, they bring back a technical requirement. There'll be a scoring sheet probably saying, an excellent response gets this amount of marks and so on. One of the criticisms I've had from suppliers I've met through contract management is that they put a lot of effort into these mini competitions and then they hear nothing. They don't, that's it. It goes into the ether. They assume they've not been successful, obviously, because they've not had an award letter, but they don't know what's happened. So we really stress it's really good manners and to just let the unsuccessful know that they haven't won, because they might be sitting there waiting for information, and it tends to, if another competition comes out, it makes them less likely to participate in it. Okay. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay. This is a very special regulation for social care, and I've got to stress it's only for services. Okay, so it is again that the EU recognised that social care services are usually delivered by local companies or organisations. Also, that sometimes it's a very restricted market. For instance, you might have, we have a national care home contract, so obviously only people who have care home registrations can go on to that particular light touch framework. Before you start going down the light touch, you really need to go and speak to procurement. You need to make sure absolutely that you're eligible to use this procedure. Okay. It's very process driven, just like any other procurement process. But what it does is it's been designed so that you can actually make a bespoke process for this. Some of the other elements of it as well is that you can actually open up the light touch frameworks or contracts that you develop for new entrants without having to go out and do a completely new procurement on it. And they can also last longer. Usually with contracts and frameworks, there's an end and a start date, and that's it. Okay. With frameworks, standard frameworks, we're only allowed usually to do 4 years. But with a light touch framework, for example, it could last 10 years. So there's a lot of leeway in terms of the length of the light touch contracts and how you've gone about qualifying people onto it and allowing new entrants into it. But you must make sure that you speak to procurement before you do this, because though it sounds, oh, brilliant, it's just this is the new way for me to get everything I want, you can come unstuck very quickly on this. Okay, unless you thought through carefully how you're going to manage it because of the unique circumstances of it. Yeah, sorry, can we have the next slide? Okay, in the guidance, I talk about routes 4 and 5. This is generally run by procurement staff. These are full-blown tender exercises. So what will happen is we'll have to advertise the opportunity. Usually it goes out to the whole of the EU on this. There are 3 components that are delivered through the tender. The first one is called an ESPD. This is a European Single Procurement Document. Okay, and this is a standard questionnaire where it's asking suppliers to provide information such as their VAT number, if they had any convictions, and so on. There is an element in it where we can ask them certain specific questions in order to qualify them. So for instance, if we have a unique requirement, we can say, well, you must be a member of this scheme, for instance. Okay. The second component that goes into a tender of this type is called the quality or the technical section. And it's a series of questions about how the bidder will deliver services, or they'll do certain things, or how they comply with certain things that we're looking for. For instance, fair working practices may be included in this and scored. We'll also probably ask people how they're intending to actually deliver the service. Okay, and the third component is a commercial offer. It's really important to understand that under EU procurement law, we cannot have tenders that go out at this level that are 100% quality or 100% commercial. There must be a weighting between them. So it's usually called the most economically advantageous tender. And it's a combination of the quality questions and the commercial offer. And obviously what you'll do is, if the delivery of the service is absolutely key, and you don't believe that there's any way that you can get more, wring more money out of people for the commercial element, you would obviously then weight the quality section much higher than the technical. It can be as high as 80% on quality and 20% commercial. There's also rules about how long you have to make this available to bidders, and it's written into the guidance. But generally what will happen is it will be between 25 and 30 days, depending on how you've issued it and how you've advertised it. You also need to be really clear to the bidders exactly how you're going to evaluate them and how you're going to score their submissions. You'll also need to issue award notices and debrief letters to the bidders, telling them exactly how they scored and why they didn't score as better as somebody else, and how they could have improved their score. And what we've done is we put some example templates together for you to use to give you an idea of how long this takes. Okay, a national framework developed by Scotland Excel can take up to 9 months. Okay, but generally for this type of level of route, okay, you're looking at 3 months. And that's because what you'll have to do is you'll have to put the tender out for the 25 to 30 days. You'll also have to go through a period called standstill. Okay, and that's another 15 days. So you're soon eating into the 3 months on that. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? Well, thank you. So I think this is Colin. This is your part.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can just hold on this slide for a moment, I might actually go back for a minute briefly, and the very end of the implementation path, the discovery path had a couple more steps. So before we move forwards in that, there were 2 sections there. One has the establish funding needs, which really looked at hidden guidance costs and the likes, but also covered the options appraisal template. Now, this is a document which obviously various of you will have your own options appraisal template, but if you, for anyone who needs an option on that, a version to copy, it's there for this reason. That can be shared anywhere within the discovery phase. Obviously, there's all sorts of options. We've put it there simply so that it's in one's obvious situation for the funding needs, but it can be, like I said, can be used in any of the other steps. And finally, we've got the transition to digital Telecare action plan. As David said, this is one of the most downloaded documents on the entire playbook. So that's what we've got to finish off the discovery phase of the pathway. Now, on first glance, the planning phase here only has the 1 step for procurement, simply because we felt we'd top-loaded a lot of things into the discovery phase. This is obviously how we've set it up. Individual partnerships, as they move forwards, you will pick up different documents in different phases as you move through at your own pace. Some of the things we've put into the discovery phase you might well start using in what you'd describe as your own planning phase. That's up to yourselves, obviously. We're not trying to be that prescriptive. We're simply putting down essentially a framework for you to be able to help navigate through. It's not to try and dictate how things will work. And so in conjunction with the documents that are in the management planning phase and the technical and security planning phase, the last stage for planning as we've got it is this approval to procure, which is the business case template. So we have here a worked example of a business case, and I believe that was one of the questions that was answered right at the beginning, was about business cases. So this is where this one sits. Moving forwards from the planning phase, then we have the implementation phase, which really only has 3 steps to it. So undertake procurement activities. This is where we've placed a lot of the templates and guidance that Richard's just mentioned. So we had obviously the guidance document that will help you navigate the peculiarities of procurement regs, as Richard's just gone through. And then when you actually get to the stage of having got approval to procure, the templates for call-offs are here. So both the direct award and the mini-comp templates that Richard's just mentioned both sit under this step. And we also have here links to a couple of further documents from the Procurement Journey website, from the Document Library of the Procurement Journey website. The next step, the complete SLA with external provider. As I mentioned during the discovery phase, you may well wish to look at getting the services of someone else's ARC, and that, as Richard just pointed out, that is where the light touch, or one of the ways, the light touch pathway would come into effect. And we have here a template SL8 to be able to help link you back to cover that if you do intend to go down that route. Sorry. And finally, procure solution is the last stage of the implementation pathway. The other 2 pathways, the final step, doesn't have any documents attached, but this one we have put in one. As Richard's pointed out, and one of his, pretty much his last point there, is to go back and to provide some information to anyone who's been unsuccessful. And indeed, as hopefully Richard will be able to say, in more formal procurements away from direct awards or light touches, there is a requirement to go back with an unsuccessful award letter. So when someone has been unsuccessful, there are certain requirements you need to provide. And what we've put into the procure solution is a template of an unsuccessful letter. There's not really a template for a successful procurement award letter. That tends to be a little bit less regulated, but certainly there are requirements based around the unsuccessful award. Richard, is there anything you want to say about that? Or am I just jumping?
No, it's just, you know, that this is just these are templates that we've used before, and they're just really for guidance for you. I mean, you can use the templates obviously, but if you have different requirements at your organization, then again, you know, just replace those your organization ones instead of using these ones.
Okay. So that's really the pathway in short. The one other thing I would say to all of this is the pathway is provided for your benefit and for all partnerships. And as I think David said at the beginning, they are intended to be an iterative process. So essentially, this is it as it's provided to you now. Based on your feedback or your requests, we are more than happy to make changes and add things to it. So if there's anything you think there that we can add to make the process easier for yourselves, or some more guidance that you'd be interested in having, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to look into that and see how we can add to this and build on the pathway and to make it as successful as you need it to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you to David, Colin and Richard for your presentations. So now we'll move on to the question and answer session. We can see there's a lot of questions in the chat box, so if you have any questions that you would like to be answered, could you please put them in the chat box now? I'll just give attendees a couple of minutes to do this, and David will start with the first question. Thanks.
Okay, folks, I think we'll start. So as Laura says, if you have any questions you want to ask, please put them in the chat box and I'll just work through these just now. So I'll get to any extra questions as we go. So there's a couple that have been answered, but I'm going to run through them anyway, just in case people have missed the responses. So Doreen asked if we provide support to partnerships to develop a business case. And Siobhan's answered, yes, we do. So one of the stages in the management pathway on the digital Telecare Playbook is the business case template, which is there. So that sits with some additional info for partnerships that kind of embark in it on that stage. The other thing I'd say about that is if partnerships are looking to start to develop a business case, please get in touch with us. Not only can we support with some of that, but we could also link in with some of the partnerships that have gone through those stages as well. So that might be an interesting conversation for anyone at that stage. Susan McIntosh has asked how many partnerships have succeeded in delivering a live digital alarm receiving centre and are currently testing. And I've gone back to Susan, so we have 4 operational digital acts in Scotland at the moment, and they're all at various testing stages. So everything from testing on site and the alarm receiving centre through to devices deployed to the field. James Andrew has asked if Brexit has any impact on procurement regulations. I'm going to defer this question to one of my more knowledgeable procurement colleagues. Richard or Colin, could you answer that one?
Yeah, basically there is some guidance from the Scottish Government on emergency procurements. Generally, they're very limited in length, obviously, because we're coming through in the next phase of this. But essentially what's happened is that with Brexit, it's business as usual. We follow the EU procurement rules. In terms of the coronavirus, there are some emergency procurements. Yes, you can do that.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so next there's a few questions from Derek Barr. So a few questions and comments. I'm going to run through some of these. So Derek's asking if the presentation was about buying goods as well. Derek, I think when you asked that question, I think we moved on to that area after you asked that. So hopefully that's covered that off for you. Your next point, which kind of service are we talking about? So I think when we spoke today about procuring services, and Richard and Colin, feel free to jump in, but I think the type of services we would see Telecare services procuring would be things like, at the moment in Scotland, some services procure ACT services from other local authority areas, for example. They also procure things like services from care and repair, so that type of thing. Richard, Colin, anything to add there?
That's exactly where we were aiming at when we were talking. That's where we're talking about the ARC SLAs and procuring other ARC services. I think that was the main one we'd been looking at. Yeah. There may be other ones out there. Again, we wouldn't want to dictate that to partnerships, but that's certainly where we were thinking of it going.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, Colin. And I think a lot of people on the call will be aware, but in terms of the kind of strategic direction for Scottish Government, they're quite keen that partnerships consider ARC arrangements in Scotland at the moment, and whether that's an opportunity for some partnerships to explore. So that hopefully helps partnerships that are at that stage. Next comment, we need to talk about contract standing orders. We all have different rules. Any comments there, Richard or Colin?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Every council will have different procedures and rules and the standing orders about how they will go out procuring things. And basically in the guidance document, which just to let Derek know, it's aimed really at people who are not who don't have procurement as their main job. Okay. And in it, we always say, look at your council's or your organisation's standing orders and speak to a procurement advisor. I think was the first thing we put in bold letters.
Yeah, that's a good point, Richard, and I'd just echo that a wee bit for Derek's benefit. So we've tried to prepare this pathway to support people at all different stages and levels in terms of their understanding around procurement. But primarily, these are aimed at Telecare staff that need this level of support with procurement, as Richard says. So I can reflect a bit on my own time managing a Telecare service, and this type of guidance would have been helpful for myself in that role. So difficult to cover this off from everybody's perspective, and obviously a procurement manager will need a different type of detail than Telecare leads and operational Telecare staff. So what we've tried to do is support that group primarily. Derek, I'll run through some of your other comments. Not all frameworks have a direct award option. Why are we looking at this for a service arrangement? And as a procurement manager, you're having some issues here. So I'm hoping, in terms of your issues, that we've explained the kind of purpose of this resource, so it's not specifically aimed at procurement managers. Evelyn Ray made a comment. I think Evelyn's dropped off the call, but she made a comment about she thought the webinar would be more about what's known to date for digital, such as marketplace frameworks, etc. And whoever Evelyn works for are ready to issue a PIN to the market to start a pilot scheme. So that's not the purpose of this framework, but in terms of digital equipment mobilising and coming to market, that's something we're heavily involved in. So we're in lots of discussion with Scotland Excel and others and suppliers about how the market will mature in that way. So again, if anyone wants any more information on that, please get in touch with us. We'd be happy to chat that over. So a few more comments from Derek. So as a procurement manager, he's having some issues. Hopefully I've explained that, Derek. You're here to see what the pathways and contracts are in place. You're not here to learn about procurement rules. So I'm hoping, Derek, we've covered that off, that it's not necessarily designed for procurement managers. I'm not sure if you're still on the call, Derek. She said you might have to go. And your last comment, I think, as a local authority on its own, procurement rules are required to be followed, and the Scottish Government regulations are most appropriate to follow. Claire Reeds asked the question, how have the 4 digitally capable partnerships approached procurement? Have they broken the components into a separate procurement? For example, Act 1, Act 2, alarm units, or have they purchased everything in one go? So good question, Claire. So they've done that in a separate way. So they've procured their upgrade to their ARC, for example, and then most of the partnerships have procured devices from a range of suppliers, and I think their thinking there was to kind of familiarise themselves with the equipment, the kind of process for all the wraparound processes that sit with also kind of installation, access and things like device management portals. So they've done that in that kind of separated out way, as you said. And a comment from Susan. So I've found the Playbook site incredibly helpful, especially the documents library. It has a huge amount of information in it, which will take days to go through, but good and helpful reading, I would imagine. So that's really fantastic to hear, Susan. And as I said, that's been the kind of main focus for us here, to build something that makes sense to you all and to co-design and iterate that with you all. So glad to hear that's doing that. Another question from James Andrew. Is there a distinction between upgrading with an existing supplier? I suppose I'm thinking if there are any angles a supplier might try to exploit. That's a really good question, James. And I think in some cases, this has been seen as an upgrade to the existing platform. And in some cases, partnerships have gone through a full procurement exercise to procure from the most appropriate suppliers. So I think it's been done both ways. And I think some of that might depend on the kind of technological changes as well. But yeah, it's been done both ways, I think. Okay, folks, no more questions in the chat. I'll just say again that if you have any other questions, please come to us. We're really happy to kind of chat these over with you and try and help wherever we can. So I'll just move on then, folks, to close the session. So in terms of next steps for the programme, I've mentioned, I think already today, we're really aware of the pressures that partnerships, wider health and social care and local authority provision in Scotland's experiencing at the moment. However, I'm just really keen to stress that the deadline of 2025, which has been set by telephony providers as an endpoint for these changes, and we know in some cases these deadlines have been accelerated and lots of work is underway at the moment. So this not only has an impact on services themselves and operational teams, but crucially it means for citizens who use analogue telecare that this may not be reliable in a digital world. So to make sure that telecare continue to operate and provide reliable and resilient services, and importantly to exploit some of the opportunities and benefits that digital telecare transformation offers, services really should begin planning their digital telecare journey now. Here in the digital office, we'll continue to try and support you all through further pathway development. So we held a launch event last week for the two pathways which we are mobilising now for the Playbook. So these are workforce and stakeholder engagement pathways. And we'll continue to plan events with all our contacts over the next few months to try and make sure that these pathways are co-designed with you all so they make sense and are relevant. We developed that content, as I said, through kind of co-design, community building. We also are finding a huge amount of learning coming back from these early adopters implementation group that I mentioned earlier. And it's an iterative resource, so it's constantly updated and developed to make sure that it stays relevant for you all. Just in terms of how we'll keep you all updated, so we engage with you all regularly. I think most of you know that through the usual channels, so things like social media and email, and we also regularly run things like today's webinar. So just to close, I just really want to say thank you to Colin and Richard for their input, and thank you to everyone today for listening in and for asking questions and contributing. Please, I've said already, please share details of the session with anyone you think would be interested in learning more on this topic or it could be relevant for. And please also get in touch with us here at the Digital Office if you want to discuss anything at all related to digital telecare. We're really happy to help. We really need your support, and we really need to continue to collaborate with you all to ensure that what we're building here is relevant and actually saves you time and effort as you move forward. So please just stay in touch, and please let us know if you have any questions or want to chat anything over. And that's me for today. Thank you very much, everyone.